Let's face it, Electro is pretty stinky, and it has been for a long time. I'm not talking about the Electro characters themselves, but rather the Electro element itself, and more specifically the element's damage multipliers, synergy with other elements, and its team's elemental resonance. However, this is actually nothing new. In fact, many players, including myself, realized very early on into Genshin Impact's lifecycle that Electro was very lackluster, and it only became more and more evident as the game progressed, and we got more units added to the game. Although Electro does have its specific niches, such as lowering enemies' resistance to physical damage, it isn't nearly enough to justify just how weak its reactions and resonances are compared to other elements. That's why today we're going to be dissecting Electro as an element and attempting to fix it based on what we know about in-game mechanics. Keep in mind these are my personal thoughts and ideas about the element and how to fix some of the current issues that Electro is facing, but I will do my best to stay fairly objective and offer the best fixes that I think are within reason and won't throw the game out of balance. If you do end up enjoying the video, please feel free to leave me a like and comment down below with your thoughts and ideas regarding Electro. I'd really love to hear what you guys have to say, and I would appreciate it since it helps my videos get pushed into the ever-fluctuating YouTube algorithm. And if you want to see more Genshin Impact content from me, make sure to subscribe. I make everything from character builds, team comp guides, damage showcases, and even theory videos like this, so if any of that's up your alley, I'd love to have you along for the ride. Alright, and with all that out of the way, let's get into the video. Okay, but first, let's get some history out of the way regarding buffing in Genshin Impact. And yes, it is entirely possible for Mihoyo to fix and rework Electro. In fact, this wouldn't be the first time that they've buffed or reworked an entire element. For newer players that may not know, before there was such a large outcry for an Electro buff, there was arguably an even larger one for Geo. In the early months of Genshin, Geo was almost useless. Geo essentially could create crystallized shields, and with Geo Resonance give increased interruption resistance and a 15% boost to attack. And while all of these things are useful, it wasn't nearly enough given the lack of synergy with other elements, and the numerous advantages that you could get by simply using another element. Things eventually came to a head when Zhongli was released, and he didn't meet a lot of the player base's standards as an Archon. And eventually Mihoyo not only reworked his entire kit, but the Geo Resonance as well, changing Enduring Rock to what we know it as today. Shield strength increased by 15%, and while party members were protected by a shield, they gain a 15% damage increase instead of a 15% attack boost. On top of this, it also decreased enemies' resistance to Geo by 20% for 15 seconds whenever dealing damage to an enemy. As you can see, this is significantly more balanced and makes Geo far more viable both defensively and offensively. And now with Ball receiving similar backlash, a large part of the community is hoping for similar changes to Electro. And yes, Mihoyo did technically end up buffing Electro's reactions in 1.6, with the changes made to elemental mastery scaling. However, instead of Electro seeing a significant boost in elemental reaction damage like we hoped, Electro reactions only got a small boost to their overall damage, while it was actually a Nemo that came out on top, seeing very significant damage increases to Nemo swirl reactions. So what makes Electro so bad? Well, a few things. First off, Electro really suffers, and I do mean really suffers, from an identity crisis. Is it a damage dealing element, or is it a supporting element? See, that's the main issue. It's technically both, but it doesn't really excel at either one. On the damage dealing side of things, all of Electro's reactions are actually transformative, not amplifying. Alright, real quick, just so that we're all on the same page, Cryo, Hydro, and Pyro are all great damage dealers because they are able to deal amplifying reactions such as Melt and Vaporize. These deal 1.5 and 2 times damage depending on the order of what element is applied first. Electro and Anemo, on the other hand, deal transformative damage, meaning the damage that they deal is set and based completely on the character's level and the amount of elemental mastery that they have. This isn't a real issue for Anemo because of the fact that they can trigger multiple reactions at once and can even deal amplifying damage when triggering Melt and Vaporize swirls. Electro, on the other hand, is completely gimped by the reaction damage and is constricted to only dealing Superconduct, Electro Charged, and Overload, all of which offer very little damage unless you invest a lot into elemental mastery. On top of this, transformative reactions are fixed, meaning they will always deal the same amount of damage no matter what, and are completely unable to crit. This means that if you build primarily into crit stats for Electro damage without building any elemental mastery, your Superconduct, Electro Charged, and Overload damage will hit like a wet noodle. But unfortunately, Electro's downfalls don't end there, because the Electro Resonance is by far one of the worst offenders. Essentially, all high voltage does is give you one electro particle every time you cause an electro reaction, which can only trigger once every 5 seconds. And it also reduces the time that you're affected by Hydro by 40%. This is absolute garbage. I know that Electro is supposed to be energy focused, but one electro particle every 5 seconds? Come on, that's just plain awful. Why on earth would you ever bring 2 Electro units when you could bring 2 Pyro units for a 25% attack boost, or bring 2 Cryo units so that you can boost your crit rate by 15% when attacking enemies afflicted by Cryo? Even movement speed and healing bonus from a Nemo and Hydro characters are far more useful. So to be honest, I really don't understand what Mihoyo was thinking. Maybe this works properly in beta, but it really hasn't carried over well into the main game, especially now that we're almost a year out. Okay, but now that we've discussed what makes Electro so bad, how can it be fixed? Let's start with the reactions. I personally don't think that Mihoyo should make Electro reactions amplifying, but I do think that the base amount of damage should be increased significantly since these reactions are unable to crit. The damage right now is absolutely laughable compared to Melt and Vaporize, so if they are going to be forced into doing a set amount of damage, the damage needs to be worth sacrificing other stats for Elemental Mastery. As for each Electro reaction specifically, let's start with Superconduct. Superconduct is actually the reaction I have the least amount of issues with out of the 3. This is because unlike the other 2, it actually fits a much needed niche by supporting physical damage units, by lowering enemies' resistance to physical damage. However, the damage from Superconduct's initial reaction is abysmal and definitely needs a significant boost. Electro Charge and Overload, on the other hand, really need to be reworked. It feels like these reactions are supposed to be far more technical in theory, but in application are almost completely useless as is. Let's move on to Electro Charge. Unlike most, I honestly don't mind the fact that Electro Charge doesn't deal that much damage. The issue that I do have with it, however, is that it hardly stuns enemies. Think back to the last time you were afflicted with both Hydro and Electro. Remember how it absolutely wrecks you and ruins your movements, constantly impeding your every action and making you want to throw your entire game against a wall because you can't move 2 steps before getting shocked again? Yeah, why doesn't that happen to enemies too? I do think that it slightly affects smaller enemies, but typically we kill those so fast that it's hardly noticeable, and larger enemies essentially just ignore it. The extra instances of damage are nice and all, but you might as well just use another element's reactions and call it a day. I think that Mihoyo should lean more into the stunning mechanic, making enemies pause every few seconds while taking small amounts of damage. It wouldn't completely stop them in their tracks, but it would make it much easier for players to dodge attacks and set up combos. And before anyone says that this would be way too OP, look at freeze comps. Sure, freezing enemies doesn't deal any additional damage, but restricting enemies' movements is hyper valuable. And if Electro Charge could do something similar but to a lesser degree, it would make it 100% more viable and much more valuable as a reaction. Next, let's try to fix Overload. In concept, causing explosion damage and staggering enemies sounds great, right? Well, not when you're trying to defeat enemies within a time limit and you have to keep chasing after their skyrocketing bodies as you knock them away from you, wasting valuable seconds chasing after their ragdolling bodies. I would actually argue that this is by far the worst reaction when dealing with small enemies, and while it does have its uses staggering medium-sized enemies from attacking, it's essentially useless against large enemies since it hardly or sometimes doesn't even stagger them at all, and deals mediocre damage compared to amplifying damage. But instead of going the simple route of, let's just increase the damage multipliers, why don't we try something different? Since you are essentially hitting enemies with explosions, wouldn't it make sense for the explosion damage to lower enemies' defenses? Currently, there are no reactions that cause a defense reduction, and honestly I think that this would fit Overload very well. And honestly, it wouldn't even have to be a large amount. Honestly, anywhere from 10 to 20% defense down for a set amount of time would be absolutely amazing. It would make sacrificing reaction damage completely worth it because it would allow your entire team to hit a bit harder. Alright, and lastly, let's go over Electro Resonance. Instead of one electro particle every 5 seconds, how about a 15 to 30% energy recharge to all party members? Electro has slowly been focusing more and more on energy, and I think that this would be a fantastic way for the entire team to benefit instead of just Electro party members. This would be such a significant boost from 1 energy particle every 5 seconds, which was completely useless. This would also be extremely beneficial because it would require less substat rolls for ER on your artifacts in order to make high-cost burst users like Xiangling, Xingqiu, and Eula work efficiently. Honestly, this would be my personal pick for Electro Resonance, but just for fun, let's throw in another option. What if, similarly to Cryo, when you get a 15% crit rate bonus when fighting enemies afflicted with Cryo, instead when you're fighting enemies afflicted with Electro, you gained a 20 to 30% increase to crit damage? It's honestly so strange that we have a crit rate resonance, but not a crit damage one. So I really think that this could give Electro a big leg up it desperately needs. Honestly, I would be totally fine with either of these options, but it is completely undeniable that Electro Resonance needs some kind of change in order to be competitive with other elements' resonances. Alright guys, and there you have it. These are my personal thoughts and ideas on how to fix Electro as an element. Let me know if you agree or disagree with any of my takes, and feel free to leave your personal ideas and thoughts about Electro and how to fix it down below in the comments. I'm actually really curious to hear what other people have to say about Electro, and would love to have a conversation with you guys down below. Also, if you did end up enjoying the video and want to see more from me, please hit that subscribe button. We're actually getting closer and closer to 5,000 subscribers, and I'd really love to have you along for the ride. Alright guys, until next time, best wishes, bye!